Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. I think firstly that I am disappointed that the government has decided to turn over the Dáil this week to host a backslappers convention for themselves. I think it's actually quite embarrassing. I would have thought that she had enough of that at the weekend, but clearly maybe the Labour Party felt a bit left out. I think there are a lot of people in Irish society who would like to slap people, but I'm not sure that it is actually on the back. And genuinely, if I was in government, I would be hanging my head in shame at the litany of broken promises that she has stood over. But I think that none is more apparent than the appalling treatment of young people in our society, where we have a scenario now where the government's solution to long-term unemployment is to frog march people into a gateway scheme of essentially working for nothing for the local authorities. While 3,000 jobs have been axed in the past year, they are going to be replaced by young people or others, long-term unemployed people, essentially working for nothing. And what future does this hold for people? The reality is that this government has relied overly on the private sector, and the fruits of your labour has been the number of companies which have closed down over the past few years, long-standing good quality jobs eliminated from our economy. And the idea that you would compound that situation by undermining the public sector is absolute lunacy in my regard. And opportunities which were there for people before, when they left school, to take up a secure, permanent, pensionable job with the local authority, for example, are now being eliminated and replaced by what is in essence a chain gang. And when you see this, at the same time, we have in Ireland the highest profits being earned out of any location in the EU, yet the lowest level of investment. The only investment that's going on in this town and this country is buying up distressed properties for a knockdown price. And unless the government addresses this and deals with this issue in terms of a public investment programme, then we will not see an end to dealing with the issue of unemployment in the country. Now, there are so many issues and we really have so little time to grapple with them. We could be here all day. I do think, obviously, Fine Gael couldn't care less about Shannon Airport and the flights there, but the fact that the Labour Party in government have stood over a situation where we have a 79-year-old woman spending her second month in jail for having the audacity to highlight how Shannon Airport was being utilised for the US military machine, and yet our state refuses to examine a single aircraft there. The idea that the democratic revolution which our government promised us, a new era of transparency and accountability, has been absolutely and utterly exposed. Now, we literally could be here all day pointing out examples, but I am just going to give maybe a couple of them in the limited time we have available, because not from any point that this is an inconclusive list or anything like that, but how we treat individuals and how we treat the most vulnerable in society is usually a pretty good measure of whether we have things the right way around or not. And I think particularly from the point of view of the Labour Party, who've made a virtue in opposition about being somehow better, somehow more humanitarian, more liberal and so on, the record of this government is a particular affront in that regard. Now, I noted that the Taoiseach at the weekend said that he wasn't going to allow anybody undermine on Garda Síochána in this state. Well, he's a little bit late for that, because unfortunately his Minister for Justice and his Garda Commissioner have done a pretty good job of that already. And the government's handling of the recent Garda controversies has seriously undermined the good Gardaí who are out there trying to do a decent job. It has undermined the confidence of the public, and you do have some limited time left to address these issues. Now, I know Deputy Wallace will expand on some of these points later with Minister Shatter, but I want to highlight some of them. Now, the ministers will be aware over the weekend there were revelations in the media about information being put on the Pulse system system with regard to traveller children. Now, this is an issue which I raised previously with the Minister for Justice late last year, and his answer at that time was pretty much, as his answer is to everything, that he asked the Commissioner, and I am assured by the Garda Commission, that An Garda Síochána does not engage in discriminatory ethnic profiling. Well, that's not enough to the travelling community out there now who have heard allegations that a 16-day-old child was put on the criminal intelligence system with a separate number for that child, and I'm sure the Minister, as the Minister for Children, will be concerned to know whether other traveller children or indeed other adults have been put on the criminal intelligence pulse system without any reason or any alleged criminality, obviously, and I think that absolutely needs to be investigated. The Ministers are probably aware of a report into racist incidents I report for the last number of months of last year, which dealt with the real experience of people at the hands of the Gardaí in terms of racism. And during that 3-month period, there were just short of 100 reported racist incidents. Only 16 of them were reported to the Guards. But of those that did, the experience that they met with the Guards wasn't a very pleasant one, and the original abuse was compounded by the fact that their complaint wasn't addressed properly and the poor levels of communication that were there, and that has certainly contributed. Incidents reported where Gardaí told a man that his car was probably broken into by travellers, Gardaí questioning somebody with a traveller identified name, going into their background and their ethnic status and so on. And these issues have been well documented, and the Ministers need to address them, because if you're not looking after the most discriminated sections in society, well then you're not looking after anybody else either. I think there are a number of other cases that I want to briefly touch on. The Ministers are aware that last week Richard Boyd Barrett raised the issue of the appalling case of Cynthia Owens and the murder of her young daughter, which occurred a number of years ago, and the need for that situation to be investigated. And I want to echo that call today. Again, if we want to mark a new dawn in our society, then we have to address these crimes of the past. But sadly, it isn't only Cynthia Owens who was abused as a child sexually for a whole number of years. Similarly, Sarah Bland experienced a similar trauma in that regard, where she was systematically abused and raped by her father in a case that had got international prominence because a number of deputies in the Northern Assembly in particular took up her case. But that woman and her mother, who are in Ireland today, has fought a campaign over decades to get justice, and is appalled by the fact that the solicitor in her case is now the Minister for Equality and Justice, and yet at that time left her in a situation where her complaints weren't listened to and she suffered further abuse for years. Now, these are serious issues and we cannot brush them under the carpet. There's just too many of them, and people need answers in that regard. The last case I will mention is the case of Frank Mulcahy, who experienced multiple complaints to various Assistant Garda Commissioners. Deputy Rory Quinn, in fairness, has said that this man needs justice. His case of his good name being impunged by this state has to be answered. Now, I haven't got time to deal with them, but unless we address these issues, they're not going to go away. The last point I'll make, Ceann Comhairle, because the Minister is here, is the whole issue of medical care. And we used to talk about looking after people from the cradle to the grave. I think the recent crisis in the maternity hospitals shows we should be looking after them before they get to the cradle. And in my opinion, the hollowing out of the public service and the removal of experienced staff from our health system has led to unsafe practices in our maternity hospitals and beyond, not least the need to address the numbers. I think the government's GP scheme is a stunt for the under-6s. I think it's an insult and clearly has got a severe backlash from GPs. The Minister will be aware of a doctor in our own constituency who has recently taken up the practice, having come from the NHS in Britain. And this doctor in our constituency took over his practice from another doctor who committed suicide with a waiting room full of patients because of the financial and stressful pressures that the medical profession is under. is under.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
This doctor who has taken over this practice has this doctor, Minister, these are serious issues. This doctor who has taken over this practice.
Just a mind regarding privilege that people are not in the House, please.
I am going to explain.
Thank you, Minister. I'll chair.
This doctor who has taken over.
Sorry. Could you just remind Deputy Daly regarding privilege and regarding naming people who are not in the House?
This is a letter sent to his local TDs by this doctor who is currently operating this practice, where he has said that he has worked in a properly resourced, free at the point of care general practice in the UK for years. So universal health care is not the problem. The problem is the manner in which the department is implementing this without the proper consultation or safety measures for doctors who are already hard-pressed and who will not be able to deliver a level of care for their patients. This is a stunt. It won't improve the situation for people, and again, it's indicative of the poor record of this government.